Okay, just are there some people who are still yet to join us?
Two people left.
Oh.
Some emergencies.
Okay. Puuni ni ani zarara tene ni josons. So I hope all of you are keeping well. We'll start the session with a prayer. Page number 6. Soji chona lai chanju bade dani chazo jin dage jinzo jibe tsonang jin dola benje sanje dubar shu sanje chena soji chona lai chanju bade dani chazo jin dage jinzo jibe tsonang jin dola benje sanje dubar shu sanje chena soji chona lai chanju bade dani chazo jin dage jinzo jibe tsonang jin dola benje sanje dubar shu Sumjen tanje dewa dan dewe judan denpa juje Sumjen dan dunyen dan judan dewa juje Dunyen mebe dewa dan ba dan min dewa juje Nyeren chadan nyedan tewe dan nyan jimba la nebar juje Sumjen tanje dewa dan dewe judan denpa juje Dunyen dan dunyen judan dewa juje Dunyen mebe dewa dan ba dan min dewa juje Nyeren chadan nyedan tewe dan nyan jimba la nebar juje Sumjen tanje dewa dan dewe judan denpa juje Dunyen dan dunyen judan dewa juje Dunyen mebe dewa dan ba dan min dewa juje Nyeren chadan nyedan tewe dan nyan jimba la nebar juje 당한테 안에 사대만 건 맞든더라 아니 가다가 내 같이 제마산 지를 저기 줘라. Yes. So now we'll continue with the root text itself, and in between we will also address some of the sharings and the expectations.
다 조선 들어지라.
네.
다 단다 딜라 카르레 조선들라 달라니 바춘세 메신데 간다 다긴고 쮸제나 히지 왕기스 테이 디파남 달라레 바제셀라니 스라 다디 베 먼저 가란서 산타나 로일 슝카와시라 가서나 달라니 바제 소소기 따치기 노투도 개구지 재미바이나야 스라 달라니 바춘세 메신 개구지 소소 노투다 파치 재미바이나야 강다 일단 미신바지기라 강다 다긴고 쥐지나 소설로 노리 개구지요 말때 미신바지기 지랑이 소수군 고연지도 지도치바 있나야 스라 다다 소수 고로 지제더신데 가서 빼 konrolan이라 대마인 빼 소수 가서 트트 냐마지 테나레 누구지 뚝나레 테스 미글로시다나 가서 파길론랑이라 다 딘데 저버 코멘트 빼 칼로 한사이로 싫어 다 콜 니지제더라 근데 아니 히지 왕기 스테이 디바나 다 계시공이 미디 소소 노르치 체마레 아니 소소 고치 고레 단도 디 고치에 디다 미지 소 제로라 근데 소치 받을 히지 진라 히지 왕기 데이 디바남스 달래 맞으세요. 때 거기 아니 베스 수준으로 찌치면 수준 고연지 찌기나 되게 디바지 사샤주기 디 아니 디에 수준 희지왕 수준 그 셀렌토니 봐. 근데 산나타바다 아니 제세 상주선 받도 저기 가르선 라린 레슬러.
So now we are at verse number 13. Now herein it continues with how one cultivates the practice of equalizing and exchanging the self for others. So 13, even if others should seek to cut off my head, though I have done them not the slightest wrong, to take upon myself out of compassion all the harms they have amassed, this is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. Now, if we think about it, maybe this is very, very difficult to fit into our mental perspective. And the normal manner in which we have our own outlooks on the world and our interactions, maybe this is very difficult for us to accommodate such a practice. But with that being said, herein we are touching upon an important point about the practice of forbearance and how that practice of forbearance can be informed by a true sense of compassion rather than concerns about protecting oneself or concerns about your own security. Maybe the normal manner in which we practice forbearance or tolerance in situation is not really informed by a true sense of compassion, but about our own sense of security being at risk. And that's when we find it convenient to practice forbearance. Now, continuing with the discussion about equalizing the self and exchanging the self for others. Now, herein, even if others should seek to cut off my head, though I have done them not the slightest wrong. So, if we are honest, let alone being able to tolerate someone seeking to cut off our head, even if someone pulls a strand of hair from our heads, or even someone threatens to cut off a piece of our finger, or even if someone looks at you with a strange expression, we immediately lose any kind of forbearance that we have on any kind of tolerance. So that is the power of compassion. If we are able to cultivate forbearance on the basis of compassion, then not only are the Bodhisattvas able to practice forbearance in the face of such imminent danger, but they are also able to aspire in that process to take upon all the negative karmas that such a person accumulates upon themselves. Yes.
다 디존은 장도 가라서 로이로 슝가 와지다 양 쳔버지다 베데 딘데르 주레도아 다 이내야 디존은 졸라 찍인데 오늘 수수베 약보를 사면로 지다 간저 안데 데 치토는데 항상이라 다 이내 뎀날로 딘데 요바나 페션날 데지 순요바 지보마이 바타 간저 가란서 글라네 카르타 투서라 간저라다 지미 찍주버질라나 간저 주보곰투며 아니 지미 밀로시다나레 신도단데다 간데네 데스 만디는 간저 로이로 마숑와시다 남사들라 카디 자고야도 남사들라 지금 마가야 나주된 먼저 쇼도다 세상 딱 간저기 배상주 제세 상주 선배기 지마치에 된 간저기 냠네 제마투네 대대 쇼 총바지 제야 간저라 뭐보여라 수소는 예레니레 치트니 시자시나 레가체 ndo 옛날에 소소카리 제는 고샤나 가와다나 간저레 네단데 mam부용거라 드디 같은 간저 다 수수 도네셰데 패키지 버다
So I can understand that if you find these kind of instructions very strange at first and that you are not able to relate to it at all, but this shouldn't stop you from appreciating this kind of aspiration and this kind of practice that is cultivated by the Bodhisattvas. Because when we try to relate this kind of practice to ourselves, of course, it is difficult to practice. But I think it is important to kind of rejoice and to kind of take some appreciation in the aspiration of these prayers. For example, even if we are not able to practice it to this extent, it remains a fact that in our daily lives, this kind of situations, even if it is not in such extreme measures, these kind of situations present themselves And sometimes we are not even able to tolerate some words that we do not particularly like. And there are many such situations wherein our patience, our forbearance, and our tolerance is tested. So in these situations, if we have a sense of appreciation about a particular practice and instruction like this, then within ourselves, when these moments present themselves, then maybe through that sense of aspiration and appreciation, we can bring ourselves, if not exactly as it is advised, but to be able to cultivate some sense of forbearance.
지당 저기 최선을 받는 럽충마다는 춘주춘주야. 로로 코메다 가리느라 남들 컨트롤랑 하고 지네. 남사 컨트롤랑 추지나 따리 유시당아 배응라 컨트롤랑 레일 하고 여래. 근데서 다른가 저거 검표서나 다리지검 손이지검 없는지검 아니 칼리 로제심 빠르르 미 가르라나 마니에도 차이도. 봐. 근데 이는 가서 로라 가리나 가서 검나 하면 영어도 가요 많이 라첨바. 가리네 검되는 칼리 레일 하고 자. 합도 가는 것도 인 산타데다 소시치에트에다 파셔지 미기 치에들랑서 하서던데 간데스도 그러잖아 실려와라.
So now herein it is important to understand that these kind of practices are part of what we call the mind training tradition. So as the technique itself suggests, it's a training of the mind. And as such, we cannot immediately expect ourselves to be able to practice this from the outset. The mind needs to be trained and cultivated in order to be able to practice this eventually. So, as such, we need to take a realistic approach if we are to cultivate this as a part of our practice. So we start from something small. And when I say that we need to start from something small that we ourselves find actionable and practical, then it is important to look at our reactions first when we approach such a practice. Generally, it is the case that when we think that this is beyond ourselves, we extend that kind of attitude towards others too. How could someone else practice this when we find it difficult to do? So starting from that, then you begin to train your mind. For example, not to always look outside, but look within. And when you find a challenging situation like this, then for example, a moment wherein you are very easily liable to give in to anger, at that point maybe to be able to develop some sense of restraint in not reacting immediately by thinking about the fact, recognizing the fact that you are yourself easily liable to react with anger. So you're not blaming the outside situation, you are looking at your own habitual tendencies and appreciating that, then you can begin to cultivate these practices by thinking, I am liable to get easily angry, but today I will practice forbearance. And in this manner, if you do it again and again, through the gradual process of training the mind, there comes a point wherein you do not really need to struggle with reasoning to be able to practice these in our lives.
Tene da tsiga chushibadi khala na gashi dala menyen ha chopas mi gashi ji so la chi ge menyen ba na chola de ji dujare ji ko mare jaba ta kanda ji so nawan mando e mambu ji shewa ina ya sra ha chopas tongsun cheba do be na ta tongsun ko tongchen bu du pa kas be cheba yin 딱 간지 걸러 올라나다 지 용라게 배 잡라 쳔무전으로 소소라치 마르다 두자를 지 메라로 마부치 땅와이나 로버 제나야스 들라 단도 파콘로 말라진 샴베 원게라 샴베 세지 하야 되니지 지당이 미 너다지는 미 틀어 전진도 전에 파치라 청알러면 쳐야 된대 임발라인 가서 정식 레레지라 딱 군주 된대 마이바 소소라치 김베 메라로 슈스 땅와이나라 미만보 녜라 pap마 and chewa inaya tandu phala khundam lanje phase shambe wangi phagi midi yende ju resra yende ju bade ani jese shanchu sambu chuba are anganzu sujila na phala ani ya khundla ya dira khunju chu khajila wa na tandu telaba donle maje tandu tel shambe gulo chene dige yende ju ra mile de che yore yende yore ineya kyo shon maje che tandu yende ju tu bade ani jese shanchu sambu ani chuba nyana res.
So similarly, verse number 14. Even if others should declare before the world all manner of unpleasant things about me, to speak only of their qualities in return, with a mind that is filled with love, that is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. So similarly, when we think about the normal way in which we react to someone else saying particularly unpleasant things about ourselves, then maybe this practice looks difficult from the outset, because we have a tendency to retaliate in a similar manner, verbally or physically. But if we are to cultivate an effective spiritual practice, we should be able to restrain ourselves from not retaliating in a very reactive manner, and then to bring ourselves through our practice to not to retaliate, but in its place to be able to speak of the good qualities of these people who speak unpleasant things about ourselves.
Tandilana, Kajtan Rodorishra, Roman Dibi Usus and Gashiki, and me mambo Todibi Usaya, Mambo Tobi and Delaya, Tan in Duala Digala, Tidan Military, change to Tama, then Kochi Chigri, Chigri, Mambo, Shinera, Chan in Drishis, Susuki Chigi, Takala Samaduma Shevata, and it's Singema, the middle, Chiki, Tiktu Buddha or Tik Dujal Lache. The day Midula, Panaya, the day making me by Naya. Tele gewekhe jin dishira ta susu gewekhe na shege ko chalan ruwa ina singem hawa ina ta duzula susu zoba gomsa gi yuchita ani duzula jeje cheba duzula tene ani susu maomba tene masoya ka ta kango chetura kango chego badi gewekhe ni ga lamde chesung sasangi gewekhe ani dishisha go bata ani dinde yuchen dugen da chang singem hani dale tandu phathoya gi chablaya gubar cheba Ra, Haleko and the last delay the Arala Lamto Chambojere gave Kenya Najares and Pakubachi to body and the Jessian yes.
So now the following verses are also in a similar way. It's about the practice of forbearance in the face of challenging situations and how we can reframe our responses based on cultivating true compassion and integrity. 15. If others should expose my hidden faults or deride me when speaking amidst great gatherings of many people, to conceive of them as spiritual friends and to bow before them in respect, this is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. So it is indeed the case that we as human beings extend a lot of energy in presenting an image of ourselves. Maybe that is not so true, wherein we begin to hide our faults and our deficiencies in front of others. And if it is indeed the case that someone begins to publicly point out these faults and these deficiencies, then it is the practice of Bodhisattvas not to become angry or belligerent in the face of such accusations and criticisms, but to look at these people who openly criticize, publicly point out our faults as spiritual friends or spiritual teachers, because they are the perfect objects of forbearance, perfect objects of tolerance, and they also gives us an opportunity to address our faults, to address our wrong ways. So as such, we look at them as spiritual friends, spiritual teachers, and to hold them in respect rather than hold them in contempt. That is the practice of the Bodhisattvas.
Tayang chidi karela na susu yi pamila tsewa chimbo chesa shirwa. Pe susu chatangi mada pula di tsewa yubi kishirwa. Chesa dagi pyoshin chebara changna ya susu yi pyona shin jipe tsewa chimbo darwa. Chiki saya ina ya, kuya ina ya, chiki rocha nidu kare ina lamdoya chi, ta susu yi pula endi chigora. Tina shi cheba chinyingi michila, susu yi pa chesha jujilas. Kar chebe mii ane dala drashin tawar chebe kashik pe susu pe yapo chebe ina jilu tsira chik duja ro dan susu ki chundu ya dan susu la chik magawa chik susu drana shi tanyi tani yorwa mi kashi irwa tila ani nechi tepi pula mashinta tende kisi chebe ina dala drashin tawar chebe ina ani ta dila pa kari chigula na pu neba rwa neji tapes pula mashente la digala ani phudi nachagi wangi pe zatawaji nadena amadi masweni ro phugi tsabla ngashina disar sone tindegi lotang mu chetu gora amadi ro tindegi ani mashin kaza neji tabi pula mashente habar tsewa jeselani cheza 소수가 난디게 소수가 분하시 받아줘 제 약고 지 이거 있나야 니마질에 소수 드나시 쓰다와 근데 그 땅이 이미들래야 단도파 가르쳐 올라나 소수기 분내봐 될라와 아니 소수로 소연체 땅 통계기 제와지 로 근데 왜 하바르 제와데 아니 제세 상주 선배기 줘봐라스라
Now moving on, verse number 16. Even if others whom I have cared for like children of my own should turn upon me and treat me as an enemy, to regard them only with special fondness and affection, as a mother would her ailing child. This is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. Now, when we are talking about the relationship between a mother and her children, then that is a relation that is marked by love, care, and concern. In the face of any kind of challenge, a mother wouldn't betray this relationship. So as such, even if you have placed a lot of faith and trust in others and you have cared for them like your own, but if they do not reciprocate this and in turn they treat you, they look at you with contempt, they treat you like an enemy, and they betray all the confidence and trust that you have in them, then one should not retaliate and look at them as an enemy in turn. But just as a mother would look at her sick children with more love, more concern, more care, then similarly, when we come into contact with people like this in our lives, who we treat very well, but they in turn do not have any sense of gratitude, but look at us as an enemy, then we should be able to bring ourselves through our spiritual practice to look at them as most deserving of our compassion, most deserving of our love, because indeed they are like the ailing child that a mother tends to, because they are consumed by the afflictions.
네, 준석 선발에 엔데도 제투사를 상대. 아.
So do you feel that you can ever bring yourselves to practice in this manner? Maybe it's important to think about this. To what extent would you be able to practice this?
Maybe I cannot act like this, but I can still reflect on it in this way, even if I burst out or put my guard up on my fence, but still, at least afterwards, I can think in a compassionate way.
Yes. Tini chema jishinda da nyamne che kamoda injuries. Yena ya da peja de la ya pa gomri da te tela ne samlo do mambo ji tan thuna sra ne juma ne dan den da jilena jaja ja den nyamne chema thuna ya sra dan nam ju ji so so den ne dan do le di zamba so so ti sungjob chego ya do samlo tak rangshin khorgi ras yene sem ding ne ni thwa shu chembo mejo chi ora yani 무슨 콜라바야 데 참제다 데 기간에 따마토나 야스라 샘딩네 초아메죠 아니 샘딩네 티츠다 닝지 곰고레 삼삼길로 수르잠 직제나에 니 딕사레스
네네 테르다모네 칼라나 저 지마치싱가 저 제세 샹지 셈바 마레라 데데 칼레 카보레 이네 에센시 마차와체 아니 콘조기 쥐벌다는 거네 거라 지당이 미딘데도 찬제나 가서 점리가라 혀도 쳔메 예서마라 아 덴데다 투는 가서 뜻다 마도 아기 가서 지선을 강에 망부징으로 그마 잡아 쳔임 아니 지게 노바 펜서 투야 참마 덴데기 저거 고마들 때는 거라 미딘데도 찬제나 점리 베트 거라 가와드네 베 시딜린자 인사라 라 덴데 냠네 치 다딜레 마투네 소 딜레 쇼트 som바지 투바데 빼아버라 그냥 지당 가서 빼시 양스 가서 딜로 디쇼로 쇼로 도다 먼저 가와 공매 있는 디쇼를 도이다. 세상 안서 지 말어도 두자 잔잔 따데나 덴데로 도이. 에 야보쇼를 잔잔 따데나 로카디 덴데 파쇼에게 레와요라. 세상 안서 디차차비젤라 chranzo peche yansi lo digala ani chik soso nyamni chemato ne yemeche wa chanje soso gewa saya da tene phenga ra
So this is indeed true, that rather than becoming discouraged, that you are not able to bring yourselves to practice similarly, exactly in a manner like this, it is important to aspire and take inspiration from this kind of practices. Because if we really think about it, if the world is filled with people who are able to practice in such manner, then indeed the world would be a peaceful and harmonious place. Because if we think about it, theft, harassment, conflict between countries, all come from not being able to exercise a sense of restraint in our reactions. So if you are able to if people are able to kind of find within themselves to practice forbearance in this manner and cultivate love and compassion in this manner in the interaction, then indeed the world will be indeed a better place. So that's the kind of inspiration that we need to take. And it is important that even if we find it difficult, to kind of relate to it in some ways, it is important to reflect on these texts again and again and again. Because why exactly do we have such reactive why exactly do we have such reactive natures in the manner in which we face challenging situations? Because we are inundated in our daily lives with this kind of reactions. So it is important to train the mind again and again by reflecting on this text. And if you do this, then the mind becomes drawn towards these positive qualities, and as such we can begin to inculcate them in our daily lives, if not entirely, but to sow the seed, so to say, within our minds to be able to practice them. Anyone else would like to share?
Yeah.
It does sound like it puts you at ease in a way, you know, you're not holding contempt or you're not holding any grudge against the other person, so at least you're at ease. Yeah, so it's motivating to practice like that.
Di dendre nyamlen de zola mata yin de zamba chochin ni samlo dana sozo semba dit shidi pape ra yongay la pepembo yesares. Kain zena ani namji ngonzo jik semna la kunzin da nyarde ya. Ani sem chowa shu chimbo che dendre yongge yorwas. Nyamlen dendre da chedu na ani rangshingi sem dis shidi linja da yongay ki rewa shu chimbo dus.
Reja, mune ra. Chida nga zamzang nga san nga ra peshan na ma da susu san ta na ende ro da. Michile control langa nga control la waina. Viji ki tsi la de la control la waina. Phage de le nege me ha ko ma de. Susu la ten nege pa control la waina. Ra susu ge chi namdu shi de linja sen le ro ina te samo tu ru da. Susu chi lega le cha shi yak po chi na te samo control wangi. Ra pa tu do ya da temba je de ya ro. Chi 자기들이 차대로 대마선 지게 나로 잘라이나 자투 제데 근데 리도 저 콘도왕게 지게 자기들이 리치 짜야도 근데 리도 인지민지 콘도 집어만 잠잠한 semba 자기들이 차는데 근데 제도 좋아 제자 근데 콘도데 갈라나 라지 마시웨치 semba 마시와치비 semba 진이와 인자 디긴 언저 빼는데 자신은 콘도 가리는 대수 삼매긴 언저 가지는 수술을 땡땡내고 라 얘네 언저 가르상으로 파 콘도 질라나 수술 제비 전화로 실려줘. 미디기 쓰질란 텔레파시 러트와는 나랑 짝부여 상거때 되는 것도 bednodio. 개회 파샤쇼 파기를 느낌에 관시때 소설에 되네 느도. 아니 칼라지산을 처음이야. 니는 니 마쿠야. 라 아니 찍레가 질레네 딱도 치마도야. 남들 로바도 참보 야보여네. 되리치 콘도지 미질라 콘도사디나 그냥 가산이서 도보 참아 뜻이 그런 남지도 통데 파타린도에 뜻삼아 소설을 내어라 세상에서 콘로레드 곧만 사는 거들 개페 미주지래다 라 이내 간조디 까동 소득마다 이네들 이미다니 갈래 이마칠 간조 저거 보면 된대 저배 파신 터트야 돼 갈래 가보라.
So now, rather than just always kind of reading a text like this, we should be able to relate what the text instructs us and what the text teaches to our own experiences of these negative emotions. If we are to cultivate love and compassion and so forth, first it is important that we do not give into these negative emotions. And if we if we are to effectively not give into these negative emotions, we need to recognize them for what they are, recognize the manner in which it affects and influences us. And as such, we Buddhists placed a lot of importance on contemplating on the negative consequences of these disturbing emotions. So, for example, think about sometimes when we become angry, how it naturally it disturbs the natural peace and calm of the mind, and then we become restless. We forget where we are sometimes. We fail to appreciate the situation where we are in when we become angry, and then also whether our anger translates into something that hurts others or not, it is important first to reflect on the manner in which it harms ourselves. And when we begin to reflect on that, maybe then we begin to have a more personal appreciation about the negative consequences of anger and these disturbing emotions. We call them disturbing emotions exactly because of that. It disturbs the natural calm and peace of the mind. And sometimes when we become angry, we justify these kind of emotions as by thinking that we are reacting in this manner out of a sense of protecting ourselves. And now if you think really carefully about it, does anger really offer you a sense of protection at all? For example, when anger consumes you, one, it naturally it disturbs the natural peace and calm of the mind. So as such, you are not able to think effectively, think clearly. It robs you of your natural intelligence to decisively gauge a situation. And then similarly, think about when you are angry, can you really enjoy the food that you are eating? And if you are angry, can you really have a good night's sleep? And if you are angry, even if you are normally very friendly with people, when you are angry, then people become hesitant to be near around you. So by thinking about the negative consequences of these disturbing emotions, we begin to develop a more personal appreciation of the fact that this is indeed not something helpful. This is not something healthy. This is not something beneficial for me. So as such, we are better equipped to practice restraint when they do arise within ourselves. You had something to share?
I was just looking at the text as a sort of compass. So yeah, even if you can't reach the destination and you go off track, you still have the compass to lead you towards without getting there. But, yeah.
저는 그런 게 저와 된제로 되서는 안주기 촉단 삼대행이지 라자지요라 컴버슬래지 샤르 누블은 되는 다동이죠라 어 된제로 직 소르게도스라 컴버스 락발로 요 잠게 처럼 누블라 동이드는 누블라 레투기르라는 예바요 말아스 이네 거기 누피기르라디 초디 딱다도용 거라스 안 대다버레도스 안주기 냠len 데조 강가 타추아지 제투그레 라이 예바요 말아스 이네 냠len 된제지 제 요레라기 디tongo dos.
네, 당아서 디가라 사사산노 당 센타니르니르다라. 지당아서 담보 장데 쓰이네 엔데상도. 나저 진주가래나 지금 나셔나로 직배 자원모든데로 식다저 보금다 지카리네라 meloro바지나 시코라마 심제나지 대화데 든든든 든데 로일 마슈원데지르다. 아. 소수치기래가 지도 무슨 제다지 간데스 투르사지. 와. 아또 칼리칼리 곰드나 아군이 투에지데 이지레스 라 제세 상지 선바데 든데치네 아니 냠네치네 드로조라 nga 마트 nga 소소 메레 징가 단다 가정 된조 대진 조지 상에 밀리더라 다 진도하고라 어딘 팅아들 차데레 미니버저레 nga 로다리 파 카리네 차마 차데 여라 다 자체준다 데드레마도 되는 nga 지 갈레전에 미지버 가요 말에 상대가라 sen다 nyerdo doeda chesa thanda ina nga o de langa de dinde jitten sha same ji lo chile waina di shol khali do ra
so this is indeed true that when we first approach such a text like this then it is kind of difficult to relate to it immediately, and as such we are hesitant whether we can really inculcate this as a part of our spiritual practice at all. But it is important to kind of revisit the text again and again, to grow closer to the text, to grow more familiar with the text. And if you grow more familiar with the text, then your reflections on the text can point towards can help us reach a place wherein we are able to practice them in some ways in our lives. Because it is indeed the same case when we were young nuns, when we were introduced to such Buddhist practices and such Buddhist aspirations, wherein we talk about may all sentient beings have the cause of happiness within themselves, then it is difficult as young children to understand this kind of the scope of such motivation, that we begin to think that maybe this is too far-fetched. But as we spend years and years in our practice and study, then at this point I can truly appreciate the scope of such a motivation, and that it is a possibility that someone can aspire to be of service to not just mankind but to all sentient beings in this manner. And it is also important that we reflect back on when we become sometimes discouraged by this kind of things. It is important to, as we already discussed, kind of reflect back on the unique opportunities and freedoms that we as human beings to cultivate a spiritual practice. And when we are able to reflect on this on a daily basis, then we can begin to appreciate such practices more, and we can truly aspire, not just aspire, but truly aspire to inculcate them in our practice. And this is the manner in which one should approach it, that even if we are not immediately practice this, but we work towards being able to practice in this manner.
아니 니만 렐레 디드나 아니 최치니 인도는 냐레바 인도는 지메자 이나라 와네 가리나라 아니 쟁이 토도 버디 담에 발다 소설 강이데 오테 디갈 다콘 저버고메나 지게 차바님보다 데무님보다 가리나 드디 갖고 지마도나 땅한테 딘데로 차로라 지 도저님한테도 치베 쟁이 토도 버디 담에 발라도 차고라 디마인베 지당한테 치바이라는 치일라는 인지미 집에도 호라 치더니 시자시는 바시 두눈버 동다 네 강이도 지 수술로 동네 제사기 고유지리가 배 저버공고사 님보된 것을 드딜레디가 따따 땡토나 디베 초도 치버라 라 벤난데 가서 저버고밀라네 수술 콘도 젤라님 가서 저버고메칩니다 라 당가서 벤열네 지게라네 시레체메 저버곰서 유치레오 징게 많이로 수술을 만배전이로 수술 제거이나래 수술이나래 수술 부고 부두 남이 가리네 데델 찍라오는 가서 저세 치투나 아 안다 캐마데 콘센트라네 캐마서 직 주부질라네 마마르 두고 말에 야포질라는 터도 말에 캐마서 돈이 치투나 몰래기 가서 마도 마선다 뽀 마제디가라 마제니는 마타 빠면데 큰 증증을 두고 말아 그 저거에 뒤스들 따다 제투나 따티 카르라 오르는 가서 저거 곰 고서데 곰서 딱다 예부터 간다 두순기 예부터 고서 따다 땡투나 그런게 칼로 죄자베 표현다 참 고바다든 두고라
So in Tibetan, we have a saying which talks about when exactly is spirituality or the spiritual practice is cultivated, and it's a satirical joke in a manner. So we say that when you are well fed and in the warmth of the sun, then you are an accomplished spiritual practitioner. But in the face of a challenge, then you are an absolute beginner. So this points to the fact that true practice is cultivated in the face of challenges, not in the comfort, not in your comfort zone. So, as we already talked about how we are tested by these kind of challenging situations, and these challenging situations are exactly the moment when we need to cultivate our spiritual practice, because these are the moments when the situations demands forbearance, love, compassion, and so forth. So we should be able to cultivate the spiritual antidotes in moments of anger, in moments of frustration, in moments of sadness, and so forth. Because it is the case that a warrior is not always at war. A warrior is a warrior when he is able to stand up and face the enemy when the enemy attacks. So similarly, as spiritual practitioners, we should be able to cultivate our practice in the face of challenge. And similarly, I don't think it would hurt to share another anecdote, a funny anecdote, but it's quite an insightful anecdote. It is said that once there was a person who was meditating, and he was supposed to be meditating on forbearance. And then someone asked him when he was meditating, "What exactly are you meditating on?" And then the person replied, "I am meditating on forbearance." And then the person who asked this immediately said, "Oh, if you are practicing on forbearance, then you eat shit." Then the person who was supposed to be meditating on forbearance immediately retaliated, saying, "You eat shit too." So maybe that's not the way to meditate on forbearance, that all your meditation on forbearance does not help you to not retaliate. Instead, if you retaliate immediately like that, maybe that's not the point of your practice. So maybe we are not so different from that person. We say we want to cultivate a spiritual practice, and then we begin to maybe sometimes talk to other people about spiritual practice, and if they do not have such an enthusiastic reaction, and then we become frustrated immediately. So I think we need to take this kind of advice to our heart. So it remains a fact that right now we are in a very conducive environment. We are very close to the spiritual text. So as such, we are somehow able to bring ourselves to practice, to be tolerant and forbearing in our conduct. But maybe if we go out from here and face the rush of society, then we are no longer so tolerant and so forbearing.
세상에서 샘디 진지신일 배천의 숨셔지들이 아니 나랑 같이 치투서래 와 내가 기승일에 투면가 디투어치기래 딘데로지 소고에서라 배쳤다 치 야포잖아 아디 야포로 삼도지기 맞సిం바 딜라 자체잖아 맞는 거 같이 투서래 예 맞투어 가르도 딘나로는 예 기치 나라 맞제버면 투나 같이 치투 디산당이 당이러나 대징군에 가라서 냠민데 쓰자래 팬도에서라 신방한테 대비약보다는 힘바래 딘데 건조 배아버리 딘데 삼삼지기 먼저게 님보다 칼카보다 라 먼저 니르 데스 칼로다 쟁이 태우는 산었다 도에도 뺏기 참으시죠.
So it is very, very important that we understand that true spiritual practice is cultivated in the face of challenge. That is indeed when we know whether we are making progress or not in our spiritual path. And it is important when we approach such a text like this or any other kind of text, when they begin to talk about such practices, that we do not leave it simply at an appreciation of these practices, saying that, oh, this is the manner in which Bodhisattvas practice, this is the manner in which a text advises us to practice, and then leave it just at that. maybe that's not the approach to take. We should be able to relate this to ourselves, and in relating this to ourselves, it is important to be honest with ourselves, whether we can ever bring ourselves to practice in this manner. If you cannot bring yourselves honestly to practice in this manner, it is important to develop an aspiration within yourselves to be able to come to practice in this manner, and then to practice to any extent that you can, rather than immediately aiming to practice in this manner, but to practice as much as you can in this manner. Yes.
다간지 실로카 디로라 주드니 라 주드사라 아 랑다 냠바 멤비 제오이스 다 소소소 남도 냠바이나라 네치 카레네 셴네 카레네 벤조네 냠바탄스 아니 랑라 멤바야 데스죠 리바이네 조네 벤조네 조 치즈부 때부터 카레네 조이스 데기 미치기 예스라 나제 원키스 예텝치네야 딘데기 미 딘데지기네 소소라 냠바이다 마와이네 딘데지 소소라 코 나제 원기 소소라 예텝라나 소소라 냠치시야 라 딘데기 제바이나 양스 들라 단도파 마트네 라마진다 가서 라마라 그바다 딘치고라 라 그베 다니치스 지오랑바 소소기 안 단도 그 딘데 제와네 제와이네 단도 소소기 주도 그투와 라 그버치투게 딘데기 치투메데 아니 제제디 아니 제세션 주선 받으게 아니 제바레스라 라 네.
So now moving along, verse number 17th. Even if others, equal or inferior to me in status, should out of arrogance disparage me, to honor them as I would my teacher by bowing down my head before them. This is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. So even if someone who is equal or inferior to you in your status with regards to education, wealth, quality, and so forth, should out of a sense of arrogance begin to disparage you, but to honor them, not to retaliate in a similar manner, but to honor them as you would honor your own teacher by bowing down to them, by respecting them. That is the practice of the Bodhisattvas.
다디 좁지바디 칼레스나 초에 폰시 카실라 사동롱지라 초 칼라드 야보면 폰알네 따메바 라 폰시 따데 미니 카실라 니제 내가 가르치네 미 nhập 주시는 리더 자하마레 카레나 지흐다바다 치데네 지기 가디네 미기 통주 치수 치세게 미드네 도라 딘데 제바이나야스 제바다스 아니 찹친 니지다 발라 아니 가시야 베면서 간자 나데니로 지금 자라기 나차 라 찹친부 찹친 니당스 덴지다 발라데 덴지다 발라데 지당 가서 지금 선지 마시오 앞에 덴드시 발라지 덴드시로나 고기서라 난 네네 데데라 가서 지금 실로그 네바데라 고쇼서라 덴지 떡장 가서는 찹친 니당스 덴지 tabjang haras tindegi tab tindegi na dewa inaya tando phala khadezolana ndokon ndokon tasimja taji ndosumja taji dangas ani digle di dibache dugle di dunghe sara didu dalale ba khorang tindegi kange de sosugi tslen lenji 와 근데 미기 배나 소소 초 폼바다 미기 녀주 쳐바다 아니 소소 내 자신지 포바 안직 던들어 소베 네바 근데 충분히네 근데 기강에 트이는라 디기 둥이데 소소기 카르사 디바다 아니 둥이데 좀 소소기 셀네네 싱바메 바자 단들라 직 소소기 칼로 로마 마싱바진 되게 제투고르 냐미 제투고르 사야 로치 근데 지제 고레선라 싱바메 바자 살라네
Now here, moving on, verse number 18. Now this exactly touches upon the extent of the dedication, extent of the resolve, and the extent of the scope of motivation of bodhicitta. Even though I may be destitute and despised by all, beset with terrible illness and plagued by evil spirits, still to take upon myself all beings' ills and harmful actions, without ever losing heart, this is the practice of all the Bodhisattvas. So this is indeed the extent or the scope of the motivation of bodhicitta, wherein even if you yourself find yourself extremely in an extremely destitute situation, wherein nobody really appreciates what you are doing, and then you yourself are struck with illness, but still, and even in the face of such challenging situations, even in the face of such personal challenges, still to find within yourself to take the motivation to take upon others' suffering, to take upon others' negative karma, without ever losing heart, without ever losing courage. That is the practice of all the bodhisattvas.
That is the chugupadra. Ani, that is so the Kalan, taking a lady cousin, so she low machine by me, but think that. Cici really got all to enter Tandadi and Kimba me, but then go da. Tadikalan and Hemper trashing, so like get our champion, some tam hindra leora. Hemba trashing is and Romachu dus. So let's see tam hindra shush levata, and I mean mambo channel pay, cushion and sigut in the shower, ra. Michimuchana and the chira. Tinde chivata. Ani channel young Juno person so batawa, ra, chupuchava. Now to pay Nanda Tubjurchang. She's not to pull any pay chupu in Sara. Tinde no genology the social tabaina yansra, jang. Digi dilla ani chashing majebachene, CB Benjor Himpo Mezini. Tinde Suzu missing Nalola Tam Henda, Juko, Kosa, Tokosa, genology, Kami, Chixiku, Kandajivana. The Nekabrilaris, Ra. She's on Kasana CB Benjo to the Himbo Mabes in the Dige, Sipo Koi Devatla, Jurumbo Yamare, Ani Tutunda, Ani Himbo Meba Zine, Ani Dilla, Ani Najema, Nashu Ins and Najema, Kimba Meba Jasela Lines. She's on Nandugi Najichi, Kandale, and Micho, Naji, the Nachi and the Lake Cover in a ra. Juchubo, the Tam Henda, Ani Sociology, Comambo, Ani Tendela, Ani Legora. Tinzula and Tidukas Casano, Deva the Zepe, Jeremy Manea, the Tembo Meba the Zine, only the Himbo Meba, Tenda Meba the Zine, and it's also Kimba Meba Jeselanis, Tele Kimba Magic and Naje Magic. Tidi Naje and Alto Miller Tonju Leor, Machi, Kokia Marilla and Ra. Tine Kimba Meba in a Susan Yamchun, Kalmo Karashupu, Tamina Karin, Yamchun Chewena, Mission Balangazogi, Chisuche, Tonju, Tanzuli Mara.
So, if the last verse talks about how even in the face of personal challenges, one still has to be able to find within themselves the courage to take upon the suffering and negative karmas of all sentient beings. Then the next verse talks about how in the face, when you yourself are revered by all, and everybody holds you in higher esteem, then how a bodhisattva makes sure that they do not give in to conceit or arrogance. So even though I may be famous and revered by all, and as rich as Vaishravana, the god of wealth himself, to see the futility of all the glory and riches of this world, and to remain without conceit, this is the practice of all the bodhisattvas. So it is indeed one of the dangers that in our spiritual practice, when people begin to appreciate what we are doing, when people begin to hold us in high esteem, then we become maybe a little bit full of ourselves at times. And this gives into a sense of arrogance, and then we become conceited, and then we no longer are able to relate with others in an equal manner. We begin to now look down on others in some sense, and this is important to overcome in the process, in the part of our spiritual practice. And this is exactly the practice of the bodhisattvas, to see all the concerns of fame, gain, prosperity of this world is fleeting in its nature, uncertain in its nature, and very momentary in its nature, that there is no lasting fulfillment that can be derived from this sense of prosperity, prestige, status, fame, and so forth. And instead, in its place, to cultivate an attitude of humility, which overcomes this sense of arrogance. This is the practice of the bodhisattvas.
Tadi cigan nishupadi katana rangi ndugo bara, magi jidama tugo. Kasna rangi shedan dao matunas, rangi shedan dao la peshen ra, dal la peshen. Dinde rangi shedan nalu shedan dradi matuwa ina shiro dawo la de shiro nga to da ndung da menda kidini gi dradi zo ra dawo shiro dawo tushi pewan jiris no sese naga susu gi dawo de matuwa ina ani shiro dawo pe yin bar kasan nga zo pa melo kontrola chikchi ndam de chewa ina phagi dawo de la yungwa ani ya pedu res 대시를 상당 니지 마봉기스 단단 아주 잠바다 니지도 좀 마를 빼샤네 라 마디게 남들 마디 칼라는 파기 드좀 두거라 수수 싫어게 다도 마기 매봐서 라 대나시기 먼저기 칼라나 수수기 she당게 다오디 디기 아니 칼라 마투와이나 싫어게 가서 지금 마다 멘다다 트데 키니도 라시기 마투르 그래서 라 나라 랑기 she당 랑기 카르 랑기 she당 dawo matuna ani shiro dawo epedures chetan dinde shambada hije ongi di mabu di ranju duwa jesena shanda hije duzula mal peshane rangi ani khunto ngaje duzula ma jasagi phege yudiya tela ma rangi khunto duzula ma jawaina ma su jawla rangi shanda hije duzugi ma jawaina ranju de rashi dudures pena nga shiro gi dalaya ani teda menda ndungdu kin phagi ma zingdi gala phagi dal mewsudas tinashi nga zu gi shanda hiji di susugi jule be ranju gi ani shedan da khundu duzma mewsuina ani ranju di man dudu re shiwacha gi resra.
Now verse number 20. Now this touches on the very essence of spiritual practice, wherein the very essence of spiritual practice is subduing our own mind. Now the practice of all the Bodhisattvas is subdue the mind with the forces of loving kindness and compassion. For unless the real adversary, my own anger, is defeated, outer enemies, though I may conquer them, will continue to appear. Now this is very true, because unless and until we address the anger within ourselves, even if we are able to defeat our outer enemies, so to say, we might walk away from a situation with the sense that, okay, today I won, but we will continue to make new enemies. We will continue to instigate similar situations in the future. We will continue to pick fights with others. We will continue to be part of such conflictive situations again and again, unless and until we address the anger within ourselves. So if we are to address the anger within ourselves and we are to subdue this anger, we have to cultivate love and compassion in its place. The forces of loving compassion helps us to overcome and subdue the real enemy, which is the negative emotions, in this case anger within ourselves. So unless and until we overcome the true enemy within ourselves, these negative emotions, it is pointless in trying to overcome outer enemies. Okay, so we stop here and break for tea.